Welcome to this two-part series about how to take on the World Series of Poker in Vegas. My name is Miles Barnum, and I'm thankful to be talking to you today on YouTube and to share some of my advice that things I've learned throughout the years. Please subscribe below to Everyday Winning Miles. I'm bringing content to you all the time with cash game vlogs, tournament vlogs, and trying to show you what it's like to be a poker player on the road and to bring the fun back to poker. But back to the World Series of Poker. We're going to get into the do's and don'ts, some things you can think about, some things to avoid. I've done a lot of things poorly and a lot of things well, and you can see how some of the mistakes I've made throughout the years, and you can try to avoid them. But let's get into some of the steps to success in playing the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas. This is an overview of part one of what we're going to cover in how to take on the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas. First of all, we're going to talk about bankroll and what it might be required and what you're wanting to accomplish in terms of money and goals at the World Series of Poker. Next, we're going to talk about the schedule and some of the options available and how you want to use that bankroll as a tool to try to come home with more money than you went to Vegas with. Next, we're going to talk about some accommodations, try to help you a little bit with that and to make plans there. We're going to talk about food and sleep and exercise because these are all important things to think about. I'm not going to preach to you. I will tell you what I've done well and what I need to still work on. Next, we're going to talk about some of the traps and distractions and pitfalls of Vegas, and specifically Vegas during the World Series of Poker. And finally, we're going to talk about goals, some of the goals that you can set for yourself, and something that I like to call manifesting success. First thing we're going to talk about is something that most people don't want to think about, and that is bankroll management. I would say of all the things that poker players make mistakes with, bankroll management is number one thing that leads to the demise of a poker player's career, or in some cases, a career that never gets started because your bankroll management is not what it needs to be. So I'm going to give you two things. We're going to talk about bankroll management from a recreational standpoint, and we're going to talk about it from a professional or semi-professional standpoint. And you can decide where you fit into the mix here. If you're a recreational player and somebody who's going to the World Series of Poker and you have a regular job and you have income and you're comfortable, you have to decide how much money you are willing to lose on this trip. So rather than bringing in any of your bankroll that you use outside of the World Series of Poker, how much are you willing to use for this summer or for however long you're going to come out for? And we'll elaborate on that a little bit as well. If you're a professional, you should have studied bankroll management in terms of tournament buy-ins in depth. But I will just say that most people have way fewer buy-ins than they should for playing tournaments. So if your bankroll is in the five figures, you should be playing tournaments that are 300, 500 type tournaments. If your bankroll is in the six figures, you can be playing $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 tournaments. But what most people do, even as professionals, is they get a big score and pretty soon they're playing the biggest tournaments around and they blow up their bankroll in a matter of 3 to 6 months. We've seen the story over and over again. So bankroll is a huge part of you being successful at the World Series of Poker. So consult a coach, consult other poker players, professionals, ask them what their plan is. But more importantly, spend some time making some notes. Look at the schedule. We're going to talk about the schedule, which is really, really important. And talk about what kinds of tournaments you should target for your bankroll and with your experience. So that's a really important thing. Think about your bankroll, how much you're willing to lose, how much you're willing to risk, because the variance in poker tournaments is through the roof. You can play the best poker of your life and come home broke, and you can make some of the worst mistakes in the world and still win a tournament. So the variance in tournaments is tough, so make sure you're thinking about your bankroll management. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is World Series of Poker schedule. Now, if you consult part 2, I talk about my schedule for the summer, and you might be able to learn a little bit about what you might want to do based on that. But right now we're just going to talk about a general schedule and guidelines. First of all, the World Series of Poker schedule comes out well in advance of the World Series. Right now I'm bringing this to you just a couple weeks before the World Series in 2026. You're going to want to really go through this schedule in depth, and you're going to want to think about what are the events that best suit your skill level and best suit your bankroll. So you're going to want to go through and you're going to highlight those tournaments. You also are going to really want to think about having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And I will present those plans as well in part 2 when I talk about my own approach to the World Series. But your plan A is what you're going to do at first and how you plan to approach the first few days or the first week. And your plan B will be based on how plan A goes. Because as you've seen in many different instances, you have people who have won Player of the Year. Good example would be Ian Matakis from the Twin Cities area. Played with him a lot. He came in and he started crushing at the beginning of the series. Pretty soon he's in the Player of the Year race, playing tournaments he probably never would have played otherwise. So your plan B will oftentimes be influenced by how you do in plan A. If things go really poorly for the first week or even the first 3 or 4 tournaments, you may want to go down in buy-ins so that you can stay a little bit longer. Again, the schedule is going to be based on how long you plan to come out to the World Series. Some people it's a weekend, sometimes it's a full week. People like myself who love the World Series will go up for as long as 4, 5, or 6 weeks. Also think about if you want to take a break. I have friends who will take a week or so in the middle or 3, 4 days, go spend time with family, get out of the city. I've done it both ways. I think it just depends on what you need. But as far as schedule goes, remember the World Series of Poker is not the only place where there are tournaments. So you really want to be hunting for value all over town, finding the tournaments that fit within your bankroll. There are so many options all around town. A couple of years ago, I had a decent WSOP, but one of my biggest return on investment was over at the Golden Nugget where they were running tournaments. I went down there because a friend was playing, and so there's tournaments all over town. And I'll get into that here, and I'll also get into that in part 2 as far as places that I'm going to be looking for tournaments. Accommodations at the World Series of Poker. Now, there are many ways that we can do this poorly, and a lot of it is because we don't anticipate some of the hidden charges that have just gotten out of hand in the last few years. So I want you to make sure that you're planning your budget accordingly, because there are going to be all kinds of things you're going to have to pay for. So you don't want to be pulling from your budget if you're a professional to pay all these fees for all kinds of things. And if you're a recreational player and you're coming to the World Series, you don't want to have to be pulling from whatever the amount of money that you're willing to risk for the tournaments in order to pay for all these things. So really do some research, give yourself a budget for accommodations specifically. Some of the things to think about. I would recommend the longer you stay, the more likely you should be to get a place off the strip. If you have other poker player friends or relatives, I highly recommend finding an Airbnb, something where you could stay for multiple weeks, maybe even 4 to 6 weeks. One of my best experiences was, I believe it was 3 years ago. There was a group of us from Missoula that all went together. Myself and my friend Jimmy stayed for the whole time. And a few of our friends, like Kelly, stayed for 3-4 weeks, and some other people came out and stayed for shorter times. But it was great because we had a place to come back to. We got out of the casinos, we got away from the smoke, and that's another thing to think about with accommodations. If you're allergic to smoke or you don't like all of that. But then you're going to have to think about parking. There's a lot of charge for parking now in many of the different places. If you're staying on the strip, or if you're staying anywhere near where the tournaments are going to be happening, you're also going to have to be paying resort fees. And that's something to just be aware of unless you're Diamond or 7-star, some of these other statuses. You're going to have to be paying fees for some of these things. So really look at what that's going to be so that you're not just looking at your base hotel rate. And make sure you're looking all over town for hotels too, because there's many different options. You know, of course you can stay at the Wynn or the Venetian or the Aria. and blow a whole lot of money on hotels. But for the amount of time you spend in your room, unless you're looking at this also as a vacation, I would highly recommend that you find good value on your hotels, find a nice place to stay, and use your money on things like food and playing more tournaments, because that's what you're there to do. Another thing to think about is you're going to be paying for Ubers and Lyfts, taxis, all those other things, and that will add up over time too. So make sure if you're wherever you decide to stay, think about how much that's going to cost. I would say plan on at least $15 each way every day, because you're not going to want to be walking in all of the heat. So, and that's another thing that we'll talk about a little bit is being able to plan for the desert and all of the challenges of the 100 to 120 degree weather. Some kind of a mode of sleep. I mean, looking at something like 5 to 7 hours is all I would really plan for, because getting more than that is just not very realistic, because it's going to take a while to get back to your hotel, shut your mind off after all the playing, and then you're going to have to wake up the next day and reset and things like that. So I wouldn't anticipate getting much more than 7 hours of sleep, and that if you get that, that's awesome. As far as food goes, it's really important, if you can, if there's any way that you can have a fridge in your room, and any way that you can stock up by going to the grocery store or going to the CVS. There's multiple CVS's around. Find a way to have your own food. Definitely bring things like, protein bars and granola bars. First of all, there's a food court downstairs in the Horseshoe. There's a lot of options down there. The lines are crazy. Again, so if somebody can get ahead of you and get in the line, when the breaks happen, everybody goes bonkers. I have another secret I'll share with you in a little bit, and it has to do with restrooms. Giving away all my secrets. Okay. Also, as far as food, other places you can go in the Horseshoe if somebody wants to get a reservation at the steakhouse, Binion Steakhouse. And then in Paris, one of the places that's fun to sit and reasonable food is Vanderpump Restaurant, which I like. Cafe Americano is not bad. That one's open, I believe, 24 hours as well. That's right across from Vanderpump. Those are two places you can sit down. You have Gordon Ramsay at Paris, where you can have somebody get ahead or to get a reservation. These are if you want to have a really, really nice meal. There's usually around a 75-minute dinner break. But like I said, I highly recommend that you have non-poker related people to hang out with. But your friends that are in the tournament with you, you're going to have to find something a little bit quicker, like food court, or the other one is Wahlburgers. You go up and over in Horseshoe. Across the way, there's a Subway down there, Dave's Hot Chicken. Those are places you can actually get to on a break. You got to just beat the crowd. Be willing to walk really quickly. Those are some of my ideas about food. Again, eat well. Don't eat crazy late at night. It's going to impact your sleep and how you play, but I hope some of these places will help you. And again, if you can get to the grocery store or to a CVS, I highly recommend that. Pitfalls and distractions. Not going to preach to you. I'm just going to get into the basics of this. I myself and plenty of people that I know have done things wrong in these departments. So just make sure that when you go to Vegas, that your primary objective there is to win, because they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But if you spend all your time doing all these other things, what's going to stay in Vegas is your poker bankroll. So all I'm going to say is, when it comes to things like drinking and drugs, everything in moderation. Whatever you're doing at home, dial it back a bunch. If you need to decompress and have some drinks with your friends, just make sure you're getting enough sleep and eating and all that good stuff. Avoid the gambling as much as possible, and keep, if you enjoy doing that, have a budget for it, and don't go beyond that, because if you're up late and you're gambling and then you got to play poker the next day, and you're around the smoke, that's the other thing to consider, is that that does impact things. So that's all I've got to say. The last thing I want to talk about with the World Series is setting some goals. In part two, you'll see some of the goals that I'm going to set for the summer. But I think the key is that you have to know that regardless of whatever you've been able to accomplish in past years at the World Series or in tournaments you've played all around the world, every year is an opportunity for a new goal, a new accomplishment, something that's never happened to you before. And that's what that gets us going back to the World Series. So whatever your level that you attained, or if you've never been in the World Series before, set a goal. Set a big goal. Don't say I want to go to the World Series of poker and cash in a tournament.
Yay.
We don't play poker tournaments just to cash. We play to win. We play to final table. So when you're setting these goals, really, really think and manifest big things. And with all of that, as I said earlier, approach your time before the World Series accordingly when it comes to studying. Don't overwhelm yourself like I've done at different times, but study in the right manner. Find the books that you need to study, the training videos that you need to study, and really plan for being successful. And the only strategy advice I'm going to give you as far as setting goals is to really think about playing differently against all your opponents. You can't study game theory, optimal play, and play the same way against everyone. Really think about who your opponents are, how they play, and set goals about how to beat everybody you come into contact with. Wherever you're from, aspire to be the best player you can be from that part of the world. Another one of the options for tournaments outside of the World Series, which I would highly recommend, is playing tournaments at the Venetian. Venetian has been king of deep stack tournaments for years, many years, and I highly recommend the Venetian. I also recommend them because they are allowing me to vlog tournaments and cash games, and I would recommend them otherwise, but I love the staff at the Venetian. They're incredible. Tommy runs an amazing room. It's now upstairs. It's kind of off the beaten path, but once you find it and get used to going there, it's just great. The cash games are going to be awesome all summer. Just make sure you take some time away from the World Series events and get over to the Venetian, play their big guaranteed tournaments. There's so many options for winning over there. Some great competition and some fun players as well. So definitely, I highly recommend the Venetian as one of the options. One place that has become quite popular as far as playing tournaments throughout the World Series is the Orleans. I've got another video I'm working on telling you guys the story about the Poker Warriors of the Light. But there, anyway, I'll give you the abridged version. Is that my dad, my Uncle Gary, and my friend Kelly all worked on their poker for a couple months, became a really cool group of 70 plus guys, and went down there, and they all final tabled the tournament at the Orleans with around 300 players, and made a bunch of money between the three of them. So that spot is totally underrated. It's starting to become much more popular, like I said, but the Orleans is a great spot. They have all kinds of tournaments, high value tournaments as well, different size buy-ins, and the cash games get pretty wild there at the Orleans. So nice little food court outside of the poker room, but yeah, it's don't expect the accommodations of the Wynn and the Venetian and Bellagio there. It's definitely the Orleans it's a character. It's got character and personality. Wynn Las Vegas is incredibly sleek, is incredibly fun, and great ambiance, great atmosphere. The poker tournaments are right in the middle, in a really open spot where you're kind of like where the people are going to the beach club. You're right in the middle of the casino. It's actually a nice place to play. The cash room is kind of tangential to where the tournaments are being played. but people at the Win are great. The series are really well structured. I love how the Venetian and the Win kind of plan their guarantees so that you can make day twos. You can make day two in a Venetian event and then also play the Win event. But make sure you study their schedules and try to sneak in a Win tournament if you've got time, especially if you're going out for many weeks, because there's definitely a great option in there. Their trophies are cool, and yeah, I recommend them as well.